Hey everybody, Tony D with a hot take on the World Health Organization. Yes, I may have mentioned this in passing during the beer virus videos, but the World Health Organization, for those of you who haven't read about it, for those of you who aren't up to speed, it's one of these international organizations that the United States created with, probably good intentions for the most part. And, the people, I shouldn't say just the United States, but the people behind these organizations generally create them with good intentions because they think, well, if we had a central location to organize this, organize things like World Health, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, to help poor countries, and to help poor people, to help human rights, and to create the UN, so we can organize things. People go into that with good intentions. The problem is when you centralize power, the people who don't give a crap about your good intentions see that power and go, I need to get a piece of that. And in this case, it was China that crept up and crept into the World Health Organization for its own personal benefit. I shouldn't say personal benefit. I should say for the benefit of the communist government. And, if we had a world which had nothing but democracies, it would be a little different. These organizations would be corrupt, but they would only go so far. It would be like the equivalent of the corruption we have in Washington, D.C., right? Like, we have corruption, but it's nothing compared to, like, corruption in, like, the communist government. Like, that's a whole different level of corruption. There's always corruption in government, like if you look at the governments around the world, but the more democratic and usually the smaller it is, the less corruption, because either it's small, it's easy to see corruption, and there's like a lot of groundswell local participation. If you look at a country like Iceland, right? There's not a lot of people there, so the government's very responsive. And it's a democracy. So because it's a responsive democracy, tends to do pretty good on the whole, I think. I mean, people have a lot of shining, glowing, praise of the Icelandic government. They seem very responsive to their populace. The United States is very big, which is more the reason that it tends to be a little bit corrupt, at least in Washington, and even in the states, because even some of the state governments are huge. If you look at the California state government, it's pretty huge and, in my view, pretty corrupt. If you look at New Jersey state government, it's somewhere kind of in the middle. It's leaning towards corruption. I mean, we have corruption is pretty much a state institution in New Jersey in some respects, but but there's a balance. You can only go so far. You can't kill people. Can't murder people in the street if you're a state government. You can't, there are limits. But there are no limits in the Chinese government. So when they get involved in a central world organization like the UN or the World Health Organization or the WTO or any organization you can think of, the first thing, they're not there to go, ooh, yes, let's share information. They go into it. What information will these democracies give us? That's their only concern. They will lie, cheat, and steal. This is a government that will kill its own people. You don't think they have a problem with lying? You don't think they have a problem with bribing people? And because they're so corrupt, because they're essentially a dictatorship, anything they do under the communist government is considered legal. And when they get caught, they don't. The people at top on the top of the government don't get caught. They just pick some flunky to take the fall and execute him, and then they go about their business and continue to be just as corrupt. So it's no surprise that the World Health Organization was infiltrated by a government like the Chinese Communist government. They infiltrated it. They pushed very hard for the current leadership. And this was a guy who was a communist himself, or still is, I'd assume. He was the health minister of Ethiopia. One of the most healthy countries in the world. Yeah, and they had a real problem with cholera, apparently. I was watching some of the videos about it. Tim Pool was doing a video. And, it's insane that the guy was even elevated to this international world status, that it was, healthcare, like out of all the people. And apparently in the defense of the United States, apparently we lobbied against him, according to Tim. Which is good to hear. I was happy to hear that we at least lobbied against this guy. But the fact that we keep still giving the World Health Organization money, was an outrage. Libertarians are against these organizations for this very reason. They invariably become corrupted by either one government or another. Now, the United States corrupts these international organizations. We run NATO. I mean, if you're going to point to a international organization that's corrupt on our behalf, it's certainly NATO. NATO is the international branch of the United States. I mean, that's all it is. We run the show in NATO. So when NATO invaded Libya or bombed Libya, that was us. I mean, we directed it. We just used NATO as some sort of doily covering over our shameful actions in Libya. But the World Health Organization, the Chinese government put this guy in place. They pushed very hard for him. They got him. And, the Chinese government isn't stupid. They realize that they're villainous as compared to the rest of the world. So they try to put on airs of being just as wonderful and woke as everybody else. I mean, the Chinese government got behind the whole, well, if you're going to call this a Chinese virus, that's racist. The government of China was totally behind that whole push. So if you're still pushing that stupid meme, understand that you're in lockstep with the communists. They'll push your one defense is the Chinese government will push anything to push their agenda, and that was a way to deflect blame from them. And they're very sophisticated in that way. They're not stupid, but you could see the problem here. And thankfully, Trump has been calling this out in his press conference. He's calling for an investigation. He's stopped paying the money. And you see people on Twitter like, oh, great, Trump did another dumb thing. He cut the money to the World Health Organization. Just because it's called something good sounding doesn't mean it actually does anything. The World Health Organization, this is the same guy who praised the Chinese response to the disease. The Chinese welded people in their apartments, okay? They sealed people in their apartments. They had signs up in the street that says, to come outside makes you the enemy. If you complain, we will break your teeth. If you do not listen, we will break your feet. This is how an authoritarian government runs. They do not care about your well-being. You will either listen to them, or you will die, or you will be hurt, or you will suffer. And they don't care about your suffering either. So if they're going to lock you into a place that they know is infested with the virus, and you say, but that place is infested with the virus, they're going to say, we don't care, get inside. And that's exactly what they did. Some of these apartment buildings in China had ventilation systems. They're not like our buildings, which are endlessly inspected. These buildings had ventilation systems where, if someone got sick, the ventilation system carried the virus throughout the building, and then everybody got sick. And by cooping these people up in these buildings, they essentially made it 100% that they were all going to get sick. And you can say, well, they didn't intend for that to happen. Didn't they? They don't care about anything other than their money and their power. So whether or not people get hurt is not really an intent one way or another. They just want total obedience, total money, and total control. So this is the danger of centralism. Centralism in the World Health Organization has always been a terrible idea. This is the same organization. You want to know who told you not to wear a mask in the beginning? The World Health Organization. And people tended to listen to it. They tended to listen to it in the United States. The media organizations, well, it's the World Health Organization. They're perfectly fine to quote, right? Of course, you would think they sound very fancy, World Health Organization. So, of course, you're going to listen to them. Why wouldn't you listen to the World Health Organization? Obviously, they're very fit and wonderful people, and governments listen to them. Well, the governments that did are really regretting it now. Because if you were one of these people who said, well, I'm not going to wear a mask because I heard on the news that the mask is bad for you and could actually make things worse. Well, guess what? They were wrong. They followed the World Health Organization, which was following the Chinese communist government. So this is why I told everybody to wear a mask early on. This is why I wore a mask, because it was common sense that if you wore a mask, at the very least you would keep the germs from getting out of your mouth, and you would certainly limit some of your exposure. I mean, that's just common sense. So, these people were essentially telling people not to wear the mask on behalf of the Chinese government. Now, some of that was probably influenced by this idea that, well, we could run out of masks and medical people need them. Medical people weren't going to come to the CVS and raid the place for masks. That wasn't going to happen. If they ran out of masks, they would be at the hospital going, what the hell are we going to do? And they would have done something. They would have either made the mask at that point, or they would have washed the mask that they still had. And in fact, they've probably been doing that already. And there's a way to sterilize the mask. Now, for people just walking around like myself, I've just been throwing them in the laundry. And it kind of bangs up the mask a little bit, but you can unfold it and put it on your face. Works perfectly fine. I don't care. I mean, if it smells a little weird or it smells like detergent, I don't care. The thing's clean. The whole point is I'm just trying to limit my exposure from the virus. That's all it's about. It's about putting a barrier between you and the virus. And so these people who repeated this without checking anything, and you got to understand these news organizations, and Tim Pool's, you got to look at Tim Pool's video about CNN accidentally not really accidentally, but repeating communist propaganda from the Chinese government. One of the reasons they do that is they're just lazy as hell. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not that the Chinese agents are standing around CNN going, here's $100, make sure you put that press release out. It's just that they're incredibly lazy. I know because I've sent press releases out to places and they just print them verbatim. That they'll never check, they'll never call, they'll never send me an email. They have no idea what the news I sent them was factual. Now, this was a little easier back in the day, and sometimes you had to put in a little more bells and whistles to look more official. But when you're the Chinese communist government and you've got unlimited funds to do that, and they do because PR is very important to a communist regime, they are going to put in the extra effort to make sure they sound very authoritarian and that it all looks very good and wonderful, and oh well, this has been confirmed and this has been confirmed and these are facts. Here you go. So that's why you cannot trust a communist government, or any government for that matter, at face value. You have to check what they say, and the people I believe at CNN are not doing that anymore. They just don't do that. They should be checking everything, including from our own government, any press releases. But they don't. They don't confirm anything because all they have now is they don't report. They just have positions. And when they examine a press release, the only question is, well, is this the same? Does this back one of our positions, or is this against one of our positions? And right now it's Orange Man bad. So they looked at this press release and they looked at Trump's response to the virus, and what do you think they print? So this is part of the reason why some of this information is dangerous to people. This is why CNN and some of these news organizations are desperate to erase their early mistakes of telling people to go out, oh, this is just the flu. And some of them can't because, first off, the President of the United States had a montage the other day showing some of those early people saying, oh, it's just a flu, don't worry about it, go out and blah, 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 it's fine. And there's montages all. Thank God for the internet. There's montages all over the internet showing people who said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Don't wear the mask." And most of this came out of the fact that they relied on the World Health Organization and didn't check it. Now, you can understand if a YouTuber does that, but it's kind of not as forgivable for someone in the news media to do that, because the news media are there to check organizations like this on a regular basis regardless. So if the Pentagon tells you something, if the World Health Organization tells you something, if the United Nations tells you something, if the president tells you something, the governor tells you something, you're supposed to do your due diligence as a reporter and check it to see if that's a fact, especially something as important as a worldwide pandemic, where it's literally a matter of life and death. So I remember when I was wearing the mask telling people, you should wear a mask. They repeated to me what they had heard on the news. I got lectured time and time again about, well, the news said you could actually make yourself worse by wearing a mask and touching the mask and putting it on wrong. It could actually make you sick. You shouldn't be wearing that mask, they would tell me with some authority in their voice. And now they have to look back on that and go, oh my God, I'm an idiot for listening to the news. You cannot take... Now look, I'm not suggesting that everything coming out of CNN or everything coming out of every news organization is a total lie designed to get you. But you have to look at it with a wary eye. When they tell you something that is contrary to common sense, like don't wear a mask, people have a flu-like symptom, don't wear a mask, you have to question it. You have to question it. And when they tell you that the mask actually is harmful to you, you really have to question it. That I couldn't wait to get to the CVS and get my box of masks. I mean, I ran to the CVS and got them. And as soon as I heard people saying things like, well, you shouldn't wear a mask, it'll actually make you worse, I knew I was totally right. And, people at work were like, giving me all kinds of grief about it. They why are you wearing that mask? They're not saying that now if they're watching the news. They are saying to themselves, holy crap, that guy was right. And it's not because I'm a genius. It's not because, although I am, it's not because I'm a medical whiz kid. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has simply to do that I was wary enough to question that. And you should be too. And that's why you should question authority at all times. You should take it in, think about it, say, is this what I'm going to do? So we're coming up to an important time, whether or not you should open your shop or your business, and again, you should question me, just like you question any authority figure. And you have to think, well, is this a time that I can open my shop, that I can make things work and not contribute to the pandemic in some way, or contribute into which is likely we're going to get, it's going to go down, and they're going to reopen stuff, and then you're going to see a slight increase. I don't think you're going to see a second pandemic, but you may see a second wave of sickness. And hopefully that will be very contained, because people will be wearing masks, they'll be taking precautions. By that time, many people will have recovered, and hopefully the hospitals are down to a level that another wave of sickness will be small and containable, and people, will be able to be treated. So the lesson here is, don't listen to any central organization that you do not trust. Question all authority, but in particular, these international organizations that Trump has trumpeted as being bad, including the climate ones, including the Paris Climate Accords. See, people were very upset that Trump didn't listen to the Paris Climate Accords, but he has a point. Not just that, and look, some of the stuff in those accords might be right, but being part of this giant organization that you're beholden to, and you can see what's happening to the European Union and people leaving that, it's a bad deal. It's about control, and it's about power, and there are people who will corrupt it. We have a balance here in the United States. a kind of balance between the federal and state governments. That balance has been a little out of whack since the Civil War, but that's another video. But we have a balance. The central governments in a lot of countries not as balanced. Maybe Italy had that balance, but unfortunately they got socked. Italy has always been sort of very independent. I mean, their provinces were their own kingdoms back prior to the 1850s. So, but there are very few governments that are like ours that have that kind of balance and have that kind of independent thinking. And that's why it's great that we have 50 states that all do their own thing. And that's why I support the president's drive to open things up, but let the governors make that call, because each state is going to be different. And this really proves the statehood dynamic is one that's really, really a valuable one, especially in this case, because if you're in New York, obviously you may not be ready to open certain things because you have so many cases to deal with. Whereas in a place like Idaho, West Virginia, Wyoming, they barely slowed down. They're forging ahead, and their economies probably won't miss a beat. Anyhow, ignore the WHO. They're full of commies, and watch out for these other international organizations. Centralism is the enemy, my friends.